pull up a stool, grab yourself a Tumpy Tonic, don't drink that too fast now, and enjoy your stay at the Nocturnal Tavern, the place for your weekly recap of the events in EverQuest Legends and beyond. I'm your host, Nokturn, and whether you're listening to this in the morning, the afternoon, the evening, or while driving in your car, thank you for stopping in. Now, today's episode is a little different. We're not diving headfirst into lore or breaking down the latest news just yet. This first episode is really about getting to know each other and getting this whole podcast adventure off the ground. Now, with that said, I don't want this episode to just be me rambling for an hour. Throughout today's show, I'll sprinkle in a couple of quick tips that I think every EverQuest player can get something out of. So hopefully by the end, you've walked away with at least something you didn't know before. But before we get into all that, let's talk about what this podcast actually is, and maybe more importantly, why I'm making it in the first place. The what is pretty straightforward. The Nocturnal Tavern is going to be my creative outlet for talking about EverQuest Legends and the larger EverQuest world. We'll cover the weekly news, patch notes, developer announcements, class combos, game mechanics, macros, community stories, and some of the history and lore that have helped keep Norrath alive for more than 27 years. But I don't want this to sound like somebody just reading a list of patch notes at you for an hour. I want it to feel more like the name suggests. A tavern. A place where we can sit down, talk about what happened during the week, share a few things we've learned, tell some stories, and occasionally argue about which 3-class combination is clearly the greatest thing ever created. And then probably change our minds the following week. Because with the number of possible combinations in EverQuest Legends, I don't think we're going to run out of those conversations anytime soon. The show will have several recurring segments. Norrathian news will cover updates, maintenance, patch notes, developer communications, and other things happening around EverQuest Legends. Three-Way Theory, giggity, will focus on the game's 3-class system. We'll take a particular combination, break down what it does well, where it struggles, and whether it actually works outside that character planner you saw online. Lore and Legends will give us a chance to step away from builds and mechanics and talk about the characters, places, and the stories that made EverQuest what it is. And Akanon Adjustments, which will cover practical gameplay tips, macros, interface tweaks, and those little adjustments that can make playing the game a little easier for you. We'll also have a community segment called the Kanos Message Board for listener questions, guild spotlights, community shoutouts, and stories from people playing the game. Some of these segments will appear every week. Some will rotate depending on what's happening and what we actually have to talk about. And now for the why. EverQuest Legends feels like the beginning of something. The 3-class system opens up a ridiculous number of possibilities. The changes to gear progression, spell upgrading, rituals, and the other systems gives us plenty to explore, test, discuss, misunderstand, and then hopefully figure out together. And unlike some of the other EverQuest projects I've enjoyed over the years, Legends comes with something very important. An almost solid gold guarantee that it won't be unceremoniously shut down tomorrow or next week. There's already people creating guides, answering questions, and testing mechanics and helping new players find their footing. This podcast is my way of adding something else to that. I want this to become a place where the EverQuest community connects with each other. A place where somebody who's brand new to Norrath can find others to adventure with. A place where an old veteran might finally reconnect with somebody they raided with 20 years ago. And maybe, just maybe, a place where people can tell the stories that have stuck with them all these years. Because let's be honest, the thing most of us remember about EverQuest isn't necessarily the loot. It's the people. More than anything, I want the Nocturnal Tavern to become a place where new and returning players, and those of us who just couldn't get EverQuest out of our system, can spend a little time together each week. To make that happen, I want to first help people make friends. Maybe you're brand new to EverQuest. You don't know anybody, you'd like someone to show you the ropes or just have somebody to group with? Send me an email at nocturngaming@gmail.com. Tell me your server, your character name, your level, and I'll happily read your request here on the podcast. Maybe somebody listening is looking for an adventuring partner just like you. Second, I want to help people find old friends. I know there has to be a lot of old school EverQuest players who still wonder, whatever happened to that guildmate from 2002? or the cleric who somehow kept the entire raid alive, or maybe the wizard who always managed to pull aggro 5 seconds into every fight. If you're trying to reconnect, send me your current server and character name, and the details of who you used to play as, your old server, your guild, whatever details you remember. I'll read it here on the show, and maybe somebody out there recognizes the story. And finally, what I'm calling Tell Their Tale. This one I'm probably most excited about. If you've got a great EverQuest story, maybe it's hilarious, heartbreaking, guild drama, or maybe it's the story of a character who taught you something about the game 25 years ago that you still remember to this day, send it in. Tell me how you'd like to be identified, and if it's something that's appropriate to share, I'll read it here on the podcast. Now, don't worry, I'm not looking to make the Norrathian version of the Maury Povich show here. I'm not interested in spreading hate or airing dirty laundry. Everything will be looked over before it ever makes it onto the show. If you're familiar with Preach Gaming's Drama Time show and enjoyed hearing stories submitted by the community, that's pretty close to what I have in mind. Because at the end of the day, EverQuest has always been about the stories we make together. I'd love for this podcast to become a place that those stories get remembered. So if any of those situations apply to you, just send me an email at nocturngaming@gmail.com and we'll make it happen. Now, before we get into my own story, let's kick things off with our first quick tip. Today's topic is targeting and the con system, and how to determine whether the thing you just targeted is about to completely ruin your evening. In EverQuest Legends, the /target command can target mobs, players, and even corpses as long as they're within range. The easiest ways to target something are by using your target nearest NPC or cycle nearest NPC keybinds. Simply left-clicking on the creature or the player you want, or by typing /target followed by their name. If you're in a group, don't forget about your function keys. F1 targets yourself, while F2 through F6 target the group members of your party based on the position in the group window. Once you get used to it, it's one of the fastest ways to swap targets during combat. Now, before you decide to charge headfirst into whatever you've targeted, there's one more thing you should probably do. Con it. You'll receive a message describing how that NPC feels about you, and the target's con color will give you a general indication of its level compared to yours. Gray enemies are trivial and won't provide experience. Green enemies are much lower level and will provide little to possibly no experience. Light blue enemies are still below your level, but they may provide some experience. Blue enemies are a level or two below you and are generally a more manageable fight. White enemies are even cons or the same level as you. Yellow enemies are 1 or 2 levels above you, and red enemies are significantly above your level. Now, the color is only an indication of level. It does not guarantee difficulty. 2 mobs with the same color can be very different fights depending on what abilities they have, their health levels, their resistances, social behavior, and whether they have 6 close personal friends standing 10 feet away that you just can't see. So before you initiate combat, just take a second look around. Consider the target, check what else is nearby, and remember that blue does not necessarily mean harmless. It just means the game has given you enough confidence to make the next mistake entirely on your own. The name of the enemy floating above their head will also be color-coded using those same rules, so you'll usually know what you're dealing with before you even hit the con key. The second part of the con message tells you how that creature or NPC feels about you. If they regard you as an ally, that's the highest level of faction. They're completely friendly. Warmly, kindly, and amiably are all friendly standings as well. Indifferently means they're neutral, which is where most vendors and the quest NPCs will start if you haven't earned their trust yet or done anything to wreck your faction with them. If they look at you apprehensively, they're cautious but usually won't attack unless you do something you shouldn't. If they glower at you dubiously, they're suspicious. Hanging around might not be the best idea. If they glare at you threateningly, ready to attack, they're hostile and will usually attack on sight. And if they scowl at you, ready to attack, well, you've officially made the hate list. And some of those enemies will attack you from a surprisingly far distance. Hopefully that gives some of our newer adventurers a better understanding of targeting and the con system. Stick around because later in the show, during our Akanon adjustment segment, I've got another quick tip waiting for you. But first, the telling of Nokturn's tale. So I feel like I should be totally upfront with you here. I absolutely have written this out so that I wasn't forgetting something or losing track of where I was at. So if I sound like I'm reading this section I apologize, it's because I kind of am. The year was 2000. I was stationed in England while serving in the Air Force, and I had been reading about this game called EverQuest in gaming magazines, because the internet didn't have everything yet. And most of what I was reading about was how EverQuest was breaking up marriages and how people were ruining their lives over this game. So naturally, while I was at the base exchange one day and saw the Ruins of Canark expansion sitting on the shelf, I thought, hey, why don't I give this a shot and see what all the fuss is about? I bought it, took it home, installed it, and then discovered that I needed a subscription, even though it clearly said that on the box. Apparently, reading comprehension was not one of the required skills for beginning your adventures in Norrath. Once I got everything set up, I started playing, and I played for, I don't even know how many hours over the next couple of days, but I remember very clearly the exact moment that I became hooked on the MMO grind. I was playing a ranger and I was making some arrows, so I went around collecting the individual components, placing them into a fletching kit, and then hitting combine. And that was what grabbed me. It felt like more than just clicking a couple of buttons on a computer screen. It felt like I had actually made something. Now, I know that sounds pretty hyperbolic. They were virtual arrows in a video game. I hadn't forged the One Ring or anything. But it really was an amazing revelation to me that a video game could have that kind of stranglehold on my attention. I played that ranger for months, I would guess. I don't know exactly how long or even what server I was on. That second detail became a bit of a problem later. Because one day I went to log on and I couldn't find my character. I hadn't lost a character in the world. This wasn't a lost corpse or anything like that. I had lost a character in the server list. Somewhere in Norrath, that first ranger, whose name I also don't remember, may still be standing around waiting for me to remember where I left him. But honestly, it wasn't a massive loss. I hadn't accomplished much beyond running around completely lost for months, killing gnolls in Blackburrow, and ruining my own lands, as Fippy Darkpaw would have you believe. So I decided to start over. But this time, I had a plan. To make sure I wouldn't lose my character in the server list, I would just choose the last server alphabetically. At the time, that server was Zev. Thankfully, it was also a very short name and easy to remember. So I created my second ranger on Zev. Not long after that, the Scars of Elios expansion was released. And you have to remember, YouTube didn't exist back then, so it wasn't like I could just pull up videos and see what people were doing over there. I could see people in chat talking about what they were doing, and I could see the cool new weapons and equipment being carried by the people, as they walked around in the cities. But for me, Velios existed almost entirely in my imagination. Meanwhile, I was running around Surefall Glade and Blackburrow dying, aka losing XP, more than leveling. It seemed like an impossible task to ever reach the level where I would be able to experience those places for myself. Then, in 2002, the Air Force sent me to Germany. That is where I met the woman I'm married to today. By that point, I had started to wonder if maybe I was just playing the wrong class. So, sometime later, I created a human monk named Fists O'Malley, and I instantly fell in love with the monk's martial arts playstyle. More specifically, I fell in love with the ability to feign death whenever I got into trouble, which I did often. Around this same time, I also managed to get my then girlfriend, now wife, into EverQuest. She created a wood elf druid named, God help me on the pronunciation here, Sumatri Lapiu Felice. Oh, I got it right. And she managed to earn her druid epic way before I got anywhere close to finishing my monk epic. I did eventually reach the level cap, and the two of us began raiding with a guild in Shadows of Lucklin. Then, almost immediately after we reached the cap, Planes of Power came along and raised the level cap by 5. We spent the next several expansions raiding with that same guild, and I want to give a shout out to the Celestial Rising Guild on the Zev server. Those were some of the best memories I have ever had playing a game. Unfortunately, the military decided it was time for me to leave Europe, and they sent me to the North Pole, Greenland. Once there, I was having serious problems staying connected to the EverQuest servers, but from the room next to mine, I kept hearing a familiar sound. I was pretty sure it was the hunter spell aspect of the hawk from World of Warcraft. Many months earlier, I had managed to get into the World of Warcraft closed beta, so I was able to kind of recognize it. And I remember thinking, how is this guy playing World of Warcraft when I can't even connect to the EverQuest servers? As it turned out, World of Warcraft was somehow playable with an average ping of no less than 1800. That is the primary reason I left EverQuest. I couldn't raid with my guild anymore. With that type of connection, I was just a liability. So while I was in Greenland, I decided to switch over to World of Warcraft. At the time, I fully intended to return to EverQuest once I got back to the States. But my return to EverQuest didn't happen for many, many years. I did return briefly a couple of times here and there. But eventually, a friendly stranger in the game named Flappin' Twitch recommended that I try a time-locked progression server called Mischief. And that turned out to be a great and very fortuitous recommendation. While on Mischief, I made a few new friends. Shout out to Point Break 22, Suds87, Sithis, and Grumpy McGrumperson. It wasn't exactly the same EverQuest I remembered. Mischief had unique mechanics, different loot rules, and several other changes, but it was still a nice return to Norrath. Eventually, though, I returned to World of Warcraft like I always do, and I didn't really return to EverQuest in a serious way until the Hero's Journey server launched. Grumpy and Suds told me about it and helped me get everything set up. The Hero's Journey provided some of the most fun gameplay I had ever experienced in EverQuest. That triple class mechanic changes everything. Honestly, you could remove most of the oddities and quality of life additions, and I think this would still be an amazing game based strictly on just the triple class system. And that's what brings us here today. EverQuest Legends. This version of the triple class EverQuest has some similar tricks up its sleeve, including like gear progression, spell upgrading, and rituals, just to name a few. But it also comes with something the Hero's Journey never had. An almost solid gold guarantee that it won't be shut down tomorrow. So I guess you could say I'm back into EverQuest pretty hard now. I pre-ordered EverQuest Legends as soon as it became available. I've played as much as I possibly could since it launched. And now, after many years of hemming and hawing, I've finally taken the plunge and created a podcast. So here we go. With that little and definitely not long-winded segue out of the way, let's get back on track with the intended format of the podcast. Let's head on over to the Norrathian news desk and see what's been happening in EverQuest Legends this week. All right, everybody, let's catch up on what's been happening around EverQuest Legends this week, because we've actually had a pretty busy few days between maintenance, hotfixes, and a whole pile of patch notes. Let's start with the July 29th maintenance notes. One of the first fixes is honestly one of those little quality of life things you don't really think about until it's broken. Buff charge counters should now display correctly, so instead of seeing something like 1 when you actually had 17 charges remaining, you'll finally see the correct number. Now, something else that caught my eye. The original Kara Isle music should now play much more frequently. I'm really liking the music, but holy hell, the sounds of the Karen player models is enough to make you rethink the cat life. Speaking of music, the original Plane of Sky soundtrack has also been restored to play more often. Next up, loot. The developers have adjusted how loot tiers are awarded inside difficulty instances. The basic idea is pretty straightforward. Your loot now corresponds to the difficulty tier you're actually running, with a diminishing chance of rolling something from an even higher tier. So for example, if you're running difficulty 1, you're guaranteed difficulty 1 rewards with a chance to roll something better. If you're pushing difficulty 4, you're rolling from D4 and up. Now, to be totally honest with you, I thought that's how it worked anyway. Some notes from the Discord. Community member Cardos Darkforge was the first to report a pretty nasty bug involving Harm Touch 9. Instead of only damaging the enemy, it was also hitting the Shadow Knight who cast it. Needless to say, that's probably not working as intended. Another issue making the rounds involved players purchasing additional inventory slots, so buyer beware. Purchasing of inventory slots and I guess any kind of items off of the microtransaction store comes with the risk that it's possibly not working. Now, quite a few people have reported these problems, and Brassy, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, responded over in the bug reports channel. She asked everyone to submit a ticket directly through Daybreak support, because those tickets help the team verify exactly who was affected and to make sure that nobody gets missed when they do roll out the fix. The important takeaway is this: if you've already purchased those inventory slots, the team has said everyone will receive what they paid for. It may just take a little time while they straighten things out. Now, before I could finish recording this podcast, another round of patch notes came out on Tuesday, August 4th, and those notes are as follows. Instances should no longer randomly close before they're supposed to. The first-time Karen loadout issue where players loaded in with missing textures has been fixed. Armor ornamentations should now work correctly across several item types that previously refused to cooperate. Eridune's grave marker in East Karana has been updated, and auto inventory should once again behave in situations where it had stopped working. Now for some AA changes. Harm Touch 9 will no longer damage the player casting it. So thank you to Cardos Darkforge for catching that one, and thank you to the dev team for getting it fixed. Also, the Full Potential AA should now remain active even after switching to a loadout that's below level 50. Gameplay saw quite a few adjustments as well. If you're spending time on Kara Isle, the Karens now appreciate players helping eliminate erudites, and they'll also cheer you on for thinning out the kobold population in the Warrens. Several guild masters receive fixes to their training options. Shannis McDarren should no longer tell new barbarian berserkers to talk to Halladorf. The Froglock Monk guild master should now properly teach monk abilities like Feign Death and Mend. Guild masters within the new Sibyllasin, however you want to pronounce that place, expedition, should once again train every skill they're supposed to. A few quest NPCs on Kara Isle have also been prevented from accidentally getting dragged into combat. That sounds like fun. It is now possible to read a specific note type item used in a Kara Isle quest by right-clicking on it. Upper Guck no longer uses placeholders for several named creatures. The Ishva Maul has officially lost its Harm Touch proc. The Gloomwater arrow will now drop one at a time in Kedge. And we also have an important career update coming out of Crushbone. The Orc Apprentice has finished his training and has now become a full-blown apprentice. I'm not completely sure what he was before finishing apprentice training. Maybe he was an apprenticing apprentice. Whatever the official career path was, congratulations to him on this tremendous professional achievement. Spell fixes were a little smaller this week. Damage spells with stun effects should now actually apply those stuns, assuming the target isn't temporarily immune from a recent stun. A couple of Shaman healing spells had their prices corrected. And Necromancer NPCs and pets will no longer cast several spells they weren't supposed to have access to. Some more posts from the Discord from August 4th. Here was a post on the Discord to clarify a situation about how the void-touched motes work. Here's the simple version. You can hold 3 at a time, and you can earn 3 each week. Both limits exist independently. So if you hear something that contradicts that floating around Discord or anywhere else on the interwebs, that's now officially been cleared up. Overall, a pretty solid batch of fixes this week. Now that we're all caught up on the changes throughout the week, let's move on into our first three-way theory segment. If you're new around here, and since this is the first episode, everybody is, this is the segment where we take one of the 560 possible 3-class combinations in EverQuest Legends and try to break down how it might play. This isn't about finding the best build because honestly, there probably isn't one. It's about looking at the strengths, the weaknesses, and hopefully figuring out if this combination seems right for you. For this first episode, I'm calling episode 0, we're starting with a trio built around a class that has been a part of my EverQuest history for a very long time. The Monk, combined with Shadow Knight and Shaman. Before we get too far into this, I want to just put a stipulation out there that this discussion will be focused primarily on playing solo. We're looking at how these 3 classes function when you're out there by yourself. Group synergy is a completely different conversation and one we'll save for future episodes. But for this build, I'm taking Monk as the primary class. Normally, my go-to primary would be Shadow Knight. I tend to play what I'd like to call a melee forward style. I want to be up in the fight, punching things in the face, while my secondary and tertiary classes bring utility and support. If I ever wanted to level a warrior or a paladin though, I would be pairing another tank with my Shadow Knight. And that would leave me with 2 tank classes and 1 utility class. And that sounds like a pretty slow leveling process. By putting Monk in the driver's seat instead, I get to keep that fast melee gameplay I enjoy, while leaving myself more flexibility if I ever decide to swap a tank class in later. This build is nearly self-sufficient. You have damage from the Monk, tanking and life taps from the Shadow Knight, and healing, slows, and support from the Shaman. The Shadow Knight and Shaman pairing is already a strong foundation for staying alive. Slowing the enemy reduces the damage coming in, while the Shadow Knight's life taps help recover some of the damage that still gets through. Then the Monk adds consistent melee damage and one of my favorite tools in EverQuest, Feign Death. Feign Death gives this build a way to split pulls, escape a bad situation, or recover when everything has gone completely sideways. And with me playing it, things will eventually go completely sideways. That one ability should make the combination particularly useful for solo farming and leveling. You can work through an area, attempt to separate enemies, and hopefully avoid fighting the entire population of the zone at the same time. But this combination does have some weaknesses. The biggest is the lack of hard crowd control. There's no mez or charm here. If you pull several mobs and your attempts to separate them with Feign Death keep failing, things could get messy very quickly. You have tools to help survive a difficult pull, but it isn't the same as locking several enemies down and dealing with them one at a time. The other weakness is that it is a very melee-focused combination. Most of your damage requires you to stand directly in front of whatever's trying to kill you. You don't have the same range damage or sudden burst potential you might get from a dedicated caster. None of those weaknesses are deal breakers, they're just trade-offs. And that's what really this entire segment is about. Every 3-class combination gives you something, and every combination asks you to give up something. For me, this one feels like a dependable, durable solo adventurer. It may not clear content the fastest, it probably won't have the flashiest damage numbers, but it will feel like one of those combinations that's always capable of finding a way through whatever Norrath throws at it. I definitely would be interested to hear what you all think. There are far too many possible combinations in EverQuest Legends for anybody to pretend they've already mastered every one of them. And speaking of creatures roaming around places they probably shouldn't be, I think it's time for our first visit to our Lore and Legends segment. We're beginning with a character who has spent more than 27 years charging the gates of Kainos. That's right, folks. Love him or hate him, we're talking about the one and only Fippy Darkpaw. If you began your EverQuest journey anywhere around Kainos, there's a pretty good chance you encountered Fippy at some point. Fippy is a gnoll from the Sabertooth clan out of Blackburrow. Every few minutes, he spawns outside North Kainos and begins another courageous but ultimately futile assault on the city. He charges towards the gates, he announces his arrival, and then, in most cases, the guards just cut his campaign very short. After that, the cycle begins again. Fippy returns, he charges the gate, and somehow, despite everything that has happened during every previous attempt, he appears completely convinced that this will be the one time that finally works. Depending on how you look at the situation though, Fippy might not be the villain of this story. One thing he accuses the people of Kainos of doing is ruining his lands. And if you remember what I said earlier about my first ranger, I spent months wandering around Blackburrow killing gnolls. So from Fippy's perspective, I may just be less of an adventurer and more of an invading force with absolutely no sense of direction. That is part of what makes Fippy such a memorable character. On the surface, he's a low-level gnoll running towards guards who are almost certainly going to annihilate him. But after watching that happen again and again, players began to recognize him. They remembered his name and told stories about him. This relatively minor NPC from the Kainos starting area became one of the most recognizable characters in EverQuest. Now, there is no official counter tracking every time Fippy has been defeated since the game launched. Anything we calculate here is only an estimate. His commonly cited spawn cycle is roughly 6 minutes, although server downtime and players defeating him before he reaches the gates make an exact count impossible. But using that 6-minute cycle as the basis for a very rough calculation, Fippy could have been defeated somewhere around 2.3 million times on a single server. And when you account for all the EverQuest servers that have operated over the years, a very rough estimate puts Fippy's total number of defeats somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million. That's a broad estimate because server lifespans, downtime, mergers, and players interfering with his normal run make the exact total impossible, like I said earlier. But even if the real number is considerably lower, Fippy still has to have the claim of being one of the most frequently defeated named characters in MMO history. And yet, he keeps coming back. You almost have to respect that level of commitment. Most of us would abandon a quest after getting lost for 20 minutes. Fippy has been attempting the same assault since 1999. No change in strategy, no attempt to gather additional forces, just another run at the gates. There's something perfectly EverQuest about the fact that this little repeated event became important to players. Fippy didn't need a massive cinematic. He didn't need an extended quest chain explaining his childhood, motives, and every disagreement he's ever had with the people of Kainos. He simply existed in the world. Players encountered him naturally, watched what happened, and created their own memories around it. For some people, Fippy was an early source of experience. For others, he was the strange, named Gnoll they watched get flattened by the guards. And for players like me, he became permanently connected to those early days around Kainos, Surefall Glade, and Blackburrow. Usually lost, probably under-equipped, and apparently ruining his lands. So here's to Fippy Darkpaw, a Gnoll with a plan that has never worked, but absolutely no intention of changing it. Now, from a character who could probably benefit from adjusting his routine, let's head on over to the Akanon adjustment segment and talk about a quick buff macro that might save you a little time. Now, I'm not going to read every command line of this macro out loud because that would make for some pretty terrible radio. Both versions of this macro will be available in the show notes where you can copy them exactly as written. But the basic idea is pretty simple. The version I personally use begins with switching my invocation to the recovery invocation. It then loads my buff spell set, activates the quick buff spell, switches me back to my normal DPS spell set, and starts a timer on the button so I know when quick buff is available again. There's also an alternate version some players use, allowing them to step away briefly. That version removes the recovery invocation and uses feign death at the end instead. It's important to note that the feign death command needs to come after the macro switches you back into your DPS spell set, because you can't change spell sets when you're currently laying on the ground pretending to be dead. One other thing to keep in mind is the timing. The pauses shown in the macros work for my current setup, but you may need to adjust those times as you purchase additional spell gems or just some of your spells take longer to load. And with that adjustment made, let's move on over to the Kainos message board and talk about how you can become part of future episodes. For anyone unfamiliar with the name, the Kainos message board was an actual in-game message board inside the Lion's Maid Inn in South Kainos. Back in the early days of EverQuest, players used that board for role-playing, leaving messages, and recruiting people into their guilds. Eventually, external websites and forums became the more practical way for players to communicate, and the board's original purpose faded away. Also, likely some inappropriate messages caused the developers to take that functionality out, but that's speculation. But I really liked the idea behind that board. It was a place inside the game where members of the community could leave something behind for the next adventurer who wandered through. So the Kainos message board here at the Nokturnal Tavern will serve a similar purpose. This is where I'll answer questions submitted by listeners and members of the EverQuest Legends community. Those questions can be about class combinations, gameplay mechanics, macros, lore, or just about anything else happening around Norrath. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that and I'll try to find the answer. We can try to figure it out together or find somebody else in the community that already has figured it out. Since this is episode 0, we don't have any listener questions waiting for us just yet, as that would require having listeners before recording the first episode, which feels like an unreasonable standard to me. But if there's something you'd like me to cover in a future episode, you'll be able to leave your question through the podcast Discord community, which I'll be setting up in the near future. Alternatively, you can also just send me an email at nocturngaming@gmail.com. And while we're talking about the people who make up this community, let's move into our new and old friends segment. This will be the part of the show where we recognize some of the people, guilds, and friendships that have made our time in Norrath memorable. Sometimes that may be a current guild doing something interesting in EverQuest Legends. Other times it might be an old friend you haven't spoken to in years, or somebody whose character name you still remember, even if you've forgotten nearly everything else. We may also invite members of the community into the tavern to share their own stories. For episode 0, I've already mentioned several people who helped shape my own EverQuest journey. First, there were all the members of Celestial Rising, who helped welcome my wife and I into the raiding world on the Zev server. Then there's Flappin' Twitch, whose recommendation brought me to the Mischief server. While I was playing on Mischief, I met Point Break 22, Suds 87, Sithis, and Grumpy McGrumperson. And later it was Grumpy McGrumperson and Suds who helped me get everything set up on the hero's journey. Without those people, my return to EverQuest would have looked very different. This segment won't always be about the most accomplished player or the biggest guild on the server. Sometimes it'll simply be about recognizing the people who made this game more enjoyable. So if there's a player, a guild, or an old friend you think deserves a seat here at the tavern, let me know. And with that, we've reached the point where it's probably time to settle the tab and bring episode 0 to a close. If you've enjoyed your time here at the tavern, I would greatly appreciate if you could leave us a rating, follow the podcast, and subscribe over on Twitch and/or YouTube. Also, something as simple as sharing the show with your guildmates and friends would go a long way towards helping more people find us. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv Nokturn13. That's Nokturn13. You can also find me on YouTube at Nokturn Gaming 6000. That's 6000. You can find me on Twitter or X or whatever it wants to be called lately at Nokturn Gaming 1. That's the number 1 at the end there. If you'd like to submit a question, suggest a topic, share a community story, or nominate somebody for the new and old friend segment, you can email me at nocturngaming@gmail.com. I'll get that Discord community available soon, and I'll add that link to the show notes once it's ready. Thank you for joining me for the very first episode of the Nocturnal Tavern. This is something I've wanted to do for a very long time, so the fact that episode 0 actually exists feels like a pretty good start. Whether you're in Norrath or that scary place we call IRL, keep your aggro low, your spirits high, and we'll save your spot at the bar here at the Nocturnal Tavern. See you next week, folks.